I'm Kevin Freeman, and you're in the Economic War Room. We have a very special topic and a very special purpose. The election of 2020 was one of the biggest economic battles we've faced as Americans. Literally, trillions of dollars are at stake, and in the end, it's your money. Foreign governments, corrupt bureaucrats, crony capitalists, and the deep state all have a vested interest in getting the outcome they want. They win, you lose, unless we do something. This is a take-action show to protect your money, your livelihood, and your way of life. We're going to walk through the irregularities of the 2020 election, provide a resource where you can learn more, introduce you to the people on the front lines, expose those who want to steal from you, including foreign interference, debunk the debunkers, show you the truth, and give you something you can do about all of it. Anyone who says the 2020 election was normal or says nothing to see here is lying to you, and we will prove it. Let's start by introducing you to a trusted resource you can turn to learn more. It is EveryLegalVote.com. For full disclosure, Economic War Room was a founder of this effort. If you ask Snopes, it's a false website. But then, do you really trust Snopes? The New York Times has also attacked it. Frankly, that's a badge of honor. So let's open the website and show what all you can do with it. Let's go to EveryLegalVote.com because we have all of the information, election map here that you can look at. You can see the map and you can see the difference the fraud is made between who's winning and who's not. You can report fraud. See it up in the upper right-hand corner. You can learn a primer on fraud. You can watch videos that explain the website and explain what we're trying to do here. And you have the top 10 proofs of fraud. This is a new feature, the election night timeline. You can click on that. You're going to go to a timeline for what happened election night and see exactly how the steal took place. You also have the ability to go and see recent stories, citizen reports, and then memes. Here's if Joe Biden was a car, which is a meme. And then, well, I don't even want to get into that one. But down at the bottom right, I want you to see this. This is important. This is a McAfee secure certification. I bring that up because Snopes says, don't go to the site. It's loaded with malware, according to McAfee. Guess what? We're debunking the debunkers. The fact checkers are wrong. We're fact checking the fact checkers. So bottom line is it's a safe site to go to. It has on it the ability to go home, fraud primer. You can not only learn about fraud, you can get a fraud PhD on that site. You can go to the stories, in the news, resources, report fraud, even putting up an affidavit if you felt that you saw fraud and you want to make a legal declaration of that. And most importantly is this Take Action button. And when I click the Take Action button, what you're going to see is the fight for honest elections. Look at all those actions that have been taken. Those are citizens just like you who've sent emails telling people to do their job, to make things right. So anyway, that is EveryLegalVote.com. And we're really proud of what we've done there. And that is an opportunity for you to make a real difference. So if you want to read fraud reports or report fraud yourself, this is your website. Memes, stories, videos, education, and most important, take action. It's getting better every day, and it keeps track of the stuff that the deep state media and social media companies are banning and blocking. But despite all the evidence, a lot of people are giving up. There are three main objections, and we will address each of them in this episode. We're going to counter the narrative with the truth. You may have heard objection number one. It comes up all the time. Hasn't the media debunked all the fraud reports? That is a very dirty trick designed to manipulate you. I can give you an example. We already showed you that Snopes claimed that McAfee claimed our website had malware, but McAfee certified that our website is malware-free. That's a trick they use over and over. And the other trick they do is it's how they carefully word something. Sometimes they just outright lie. But sometimes they just say something that looks like it might be true, and they kind of hint at it. For example, you heard about all the suitcases that were under the table in Georgia. The media says that story's been debunked. But the Federalist, Molly Hemingway, she wrote a great article that proved them 100% wrong. Have you noticed that the debunkers never debunk claims of the left? Never do. And they rarely show you proof. You say, show us the proof that it's been debunked. they just tend to quote people who are saying something's not true. And the people they quote are always part of the problem. So Dominion Systems is quoted to disprove allegations of fraud at Dominion Systems. Here is the truth. In the year 2012, the New York Times warned that mail-in ballots were a huge risk for election fraud. Yes, the New York Times warned that mail-in ballots were a huge risk for election fraud. And as recently as 3 months ago, all experts agreed that the voting machines were vulnerable to hacking and manipulation. And in 2012, the National Academy of Sciences published a paper that said statistical anomalies were major indicators of election fraud. That's science. The National Academy of Sciences, in a formal peer-reviewed paper, they said that science proves, using statistics, election fraud happens. That's the same kind of science that they use in courtrooms all the time. That's the same kind of science they use to send rockets into space and to design bridges. Don't be a science denier. Don't say, well, there's no fraud. That is denying science. So all those who want to debunk the risks of mail-in voting or voting machines like Dominion Systems or claiming that statistical analysis is meaningless are misleading you at best. Some are just plain lying. The only reason they are claiming nothing to see here is because they benefit from the outcome. Frankly, I think it's a tell that many Republican politicians want to accept the results and move on. Gee, I wonder, have any of them been compromised? Are they hoping for better treatment in a Biden administration? Have any of them benefited from rigged elections? You know, according to YouGov poll that took place just a month ago, 75% of voters believe that fraud influenced this election. And of those, more than half believed that fraud was pervasive enough to have influenced the outcome. In fact, if you look at the poll, 2 in 5 registered voters think enough fraud occurred in this election to influence the outcome. That's 75% believe that there was serious fraud taking place. That's undeniable. So despite what the media says, you know the truth. There was serious fraud. The bottom line is politicians may be unwilling to admit the fraud, but the American people know better. Don't let the media say it's all debunked. You know there's fraud, and 75% of Americans agree with you. Second objection. If there was fraud, why isn't Trump winning in court? Okay, let's tackle that one. Have you noticed that the lawsuit dismissals are mostly for reasons like, you don't have standing, or it was filed too late, or this should be in state court, or this should be in federal court? The reality is that most of these courts don't want to touch this for anything. They'd rather not look, because if they did, they might have to do something. That's true for Republican judges and Democrat judges. They all wish someone else would do something, but not them. But don't lose heart. At the end of this program, we'll outline a strategy that just may work. The fraud is real, and there's one court that may just have to look at it, which brings us to objection number 3. Isn't all of this too late? Just as a reminder, this airs for the first time on December 8th. Guess what? The Bush v. Gore decision wasn't decided in the Supreme Court until December 12th. There were elections decided even later than that in history. Until the electors meet and vote in the Electoral College and present those votes into Congress, it's not too late. And the Supreme Court can adjust the dates if needed to root out the fraud. The bottom line is the stakes are far too high to rush through this. We need to let the process work for the sake of our nation's future. And I just give you one example. We talked to an attorney here, and I think what she'll tell you is how long it takes to file a claim, to get the evidence, to bring it out, to get the affidavits. It takes time. We need social patience. So let's talk with some experts who will address all these issues and share with you the truth. We've assembled an all-star team to share the truth right now. To start, let's bring in Joe DeGenova. He's one of President Trump's top lawyers. He's had an incredible year and an incredible career in the legal profession, and he served as the United States Attorney in the District of Columbia, which is the largest such office in the country. Welcome, Joe. I've got 2 questions for you. First, Joe, we're told over and over that the fact that the lawsuits are being lost is proof that there's no substantive fraud occurring. Certainly not enough to change the election. But you obviously feel differently. What's the real status of the lawsuits, and why are you still optimistic?
Well, first of all, both the reporting and the judicial work on this has been just awful. We have presented huge amounts of evidence of vote manipulation, computer problems, backdating, failure to have signatures, illegal mail-in ballots, illegal absentee ballots, observers being kept out of the counting areas. It's endless. It goes on and on. That has been presented to committees in state houses, in courts, both state and federal, and there's just no doubt that it occurred all over the United States. The most important thing was that there was a circuit breaker on the night of the election in 4 major cities, in the 4 major swing states, where the counting stopped, and then all of a sudden, miraculously, hundreds of thousands of votes showed up and transferring the result of the election from Trump to Biden. The evidence on that is staggering. The statistical analysis, which shows the anomalies and the incompatibility of that result with historical voting, just lays it out cold. We are hoping that Justice Alito, in the next 24 hours, will issue an order in the one Pennsylvania case that is before him. There's also a second Pennsylvania case before him, and will order a stoppage, an injunction against the certification of the election from Pennsylvania. We hope that the momentum created by that decision will in fact wake up some state legislatures and make them have what are called electoral sessions, not joint sessions, not special sessions, but sessions that the legislators themselves can call without the governor or the Secretary of State, and either give their electoral votes to Trump or deny either candidate the electoral votes, thus denying each candidate the necessary 270 electoral votes. So that's what we're shooting for. I think that all the other things are proceeding in every state, but the Alito cases from Pennsylvania are really the big casino right now.
That's great, Joe. Okay, my second question is, there's a common statement that time has run out. Next week, the Electoral College meets. Even if there were fraud, is there time to make the case, get heard, and get a favorable outcome?
Yes, there is time. Those dates are not set in constitutional stone. They are in statutory stone, but they can be bent. They can be bent because if the Supreme Court were to find that there was fraud, that there were illegal ballots, that states violated their own constitutions, allowing mail-in ballots, and if the court were to nullify those votes, it could take enough time to have oral argument in those matters and could issue an order saying that the Electoral College would be postponed for a week or so. And there's nothing in the Constitution that would prevent them from doing that, because the dates for the Electoral College are not in the Constitution.
Great. So I'm going to ask a third question just because of the timing of when we're filming and what you just shared about Justice Alito. Third question is, let's go with the concept that Alito has ruled, and I'll just ask you, okay, so Justice Alito put out a ruling, and obviously we have to dig into it, and it takes time to look in what's in the ruling, but is this what you were targeting? Is this what you were going for?
Absolutely. Inevitably, it was very difficult to get state legislatures to move because they don't have the courage. There are very few profiles in courage in state legislatures, Republican or Democrat. But we do have some profiles in courage on the Supreme Court. 5 great conservative justices, and Alito has been among the most stellar of them. And he has indicated very clearly that he was dissatisfied with how things were proceeding in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Joe, for all you're doing. Now let's take a look at some of the most compelling evidence of fraud that will be brought in when the court actually stops to take a look. I grouped the evidence into 4 categories and asked experts to address each of the 4. First of those is to look at the way the votes were counted. Remember the quote attributed to Stalin? It's not he who votes that counts, but how the votes are counted. And in this election, there are plenty of irregularities. So we're going to start with Jacki Deason. She's been a guest in the economic war room before and one extremely sharp attorney. She's been working with the president's legal team, most recently in Georgia. In fact, she was the one who broke the story about the hidden ballot cases. Welcome, Jacki. Tell us what really happened in Georgia.
So, Kevin, here's the situation in Georgia. Essentially, I go there as a volunteer, having no idea what is about to happen in the following week or so. Basically, as you've heard, Georgia collected about 100 affidavits. There are now about 1,200 across the country. And my job was to pore over those affidavits and find out what was most compelling in terms of evidence, and then follow up with those people so we could have some evidence to support the contest that President Trump just filed Friday. Well, there was so much in those affidavits. It was tough to choose, but what was clear in two of them is that there were two Republican observers at the State Farm Arena, which is now being called the State Ballot Farm Arena in Fulton County, Georgia, and they reported that they were there as poll watchers starting at about 8 p.m. And then around 10:30, there was an election official who looked like a supervisor who yelled out to the room to stop counting and that they would resume their work in the morning at about 8:30. So you can see in the video, which was subpoenaed by the Trump legal team immediately after seeing the affidavits, that in fact about the overwhelming majority of the poll workers left at about 10:30, and behind them left the press and the Republican poll watchers or observers. So that's because they believed both the supervisor and the Fulton County spokesperson, who said to the press, which was right there, the press was right beside the Republican poll watchers, that they were done for the evening. Okay, under Georgia law, the public, the press, the Republican poll watchers only have the right to be present at a precinct or a tabulation center during the proceedings, the tabulation. They are not permitted to stay after counting stops and stand guard over the ballots. That would be great, but they're not. So our poll watchers had no choice but to leave. They did. Well, later on, they get a tip from someone that in fact counting had continued after they left. So when they found this out, they rushed back to the arena. It's now almost 1 o'clock in the morning. When they get there, the security guard stops them and won't let them in. So they have a back and forth with him. He makes phone calls to his supervisor or whoever. And finally, after a struggle, verbal struggle, he permits them in. So they go inside. By then it was empty. And apparently he told them that people just left like 5 minutes ago. They've been counting all this time. So this is in the affidavit. So what do? We get the video, review the video. And by the way, it took a while to get it. People need to understand, the people who are demanding the smoking gun evidence, the day after the election, it doesn't work like that. You have to build a case, and it takes time through the legal process to get your affidavit, speak to your witnesses, get a wet signature, subpoena the video. This takes time. So finally, we see the video, and sure enough, it showed exactly what our witnesses said. In fact, it was a bit worse because we're watching, we go straight to the 10 p.m. hour and watch from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. And sure enough, everything happened as they said. What was not expected was after everyone had left, the 4 workers who stayed behind began pulling cases out from under a table. And in this arena, some of the tables had long tablecloths, black, that stretched to the floor. And some tables didn't. So there were ballot cases all over the place, stacked up against the wall, stacked up alongside the desks of the scanners, stacked up next to the people separated the envelopes. They were everywhere. And there was plenty of room. This was an enormous room. In fact, our poll watchers said they were 40 to 100 feet away from the counting, which made it impossible for them to even see what was going on. They could have had 10,000 ballots in a row for Biden. Our poll watchers would never even know, because throughout the process, early voting and election day, throughout the state of Georgia, we have affidavit after affidavit where Republican poll watchers were forced to stay so far back from the ballot counting, they couldn't even tell what was going on. And if they tried to get closer, even observing social distancing, several of them had threats of law enforcement would be called. Now keep in mind, Georgia law requires that the counting be open to the public. And that means the press and Republican poll watchers for accountability. So And we view this as breaking the law all the way through. I mean, not just those after hours ballots. All day long, they were denied proper access. So that's a big problem. But as we point out in the video, they waited for some reason until everyone was gone and then pulled these ballots out from under a table where they had been hidden from view to count them. And so what you might have seen is that quickly, by the next morning, actually, there is a website, some no-name website I'd never heard of, fact checker website, which tried to debunk the video. And it proclaimed video debunked. Why? Because the Secretary of State and his reps say so. Well, it should be obvious that if there was a massive failing here and there was fraud and the people of Georgia had their vote stolen from them, guess whose fault that is? The Secretary of State. Okay? So this guy, as far as I'm concerned, based on all the information I have, he's just doing CYA. He's just unable or unwilling to take ownership and responsibility for what happened here. And you can see why. So, I mean, and it goes way beyond even that video. I mean, we have in our petition contest that there were about 2,500 felons voting, about 66,000 underage registrants, 2,400 people who were not on the voter rolls, about almost 5,000 who had registered in another state after registering in Georgia, which by definition under state law, you are no longer eligible to vote, period. 15,700 who had a change of address, over 10,000 dead people voting, over 1,000 people who claim to have a PO box as their address. That's not legal. Over 40,000 people who moved counties, which in Georgia is a big deal. When you move a county more than 30 days outside of an election, you have to re-register. And that didn't happen. So you're no longer registered to vote, and you cannot vote unless you register in the proper county, because that's Georgia's way of keeping sure that the election has integrity. They don't have a way of cross-checking counties on the spot, basically. So we find this later. It's all in the suit to decertify. Whose fault is all of that? Who has it in their best interest to make sure they're waving their hands and saying there's nothing to see here? I can tell you who is the Secretary of State. So why is the fact-checking website running to that person to say, tell us the story we want? Why aren't they going to other people, let's say, President Trump, the Senate candidates who are Republican, the Republican Party of Georgia, and saying, hey, what do you have to say about this? Is this how this works? So anyway, there's all that and so much more. And I'm so happy because Molly Hemingway over at The Federalist wrote a piece debunking them and fact-checking the fact-checkers. I love those kinds of pieces. And so she did a great job. And we had Rush Limbaugh defending us and fact-checking the fact-checkers, Dan Bongino, so many great people, because Fox News picked this up the day that we released it on all 4 evening shows, the big shows in the evening. So it's got a lot of press. I'm so happy the country got to see it. You can't unring that bell. You can't. People saw it, they can't unsee it. And it doesn't matter what incredibly implausible explanations the Secretary of State would like to advance, people aren't buying it. And so this is what we need to contest the result of this election, to hopefully hold accountable people who might have done something illegal here. We need to investigate further, but it doesn't look good. And then we have to do legal reforms that are critical out of the states. We need to show all the problems now, get them on the record, and between now and the next election, do everything we can to fix these problems in the states, because we know they're there and they're totally fixable. Because in these contested states, they all have Republican legislatures, which is amazing. All of them, even Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they can fix this with the legislature. Maybe not in Michigan. I doubt that, Whitmer wouldn't veto a bill to fix the system, I'm guessing. But there's so much to be done. And so there's a lot of reasons why this legal process has to happen.
Thank you, Jacki. You're a hero fighting for the American people. The good news is Jacki's not alone. We have another hero, retired Colonel Phil Waldron, who served in Army intelligence with cyber expertise. Welcome, Colonel Waldron. Colonel, we've seen your testimony in the various state hearings. Can you share your findings, what the objections have been to them, and how you would answer those objections?
Well, we shared with several state legislatures the fact that the observational data, the math and the patterns are anomalous, and they match with hundreds and hundreds of affidavits of citizens from those states who've been working in the polls, who have made firsthand witnesses of lack of chain of custody, of ballots that don't meet signature requirements, ballots that were mail-in ballots that were the envelopes were opened when the processors received them. They didn't have the security envelope, just lots and lots of irregularities in the actual voting process. We've also looked at, the machine issues. There's, recently as in Ware County, Georgia, the input does not equal the output. And that was the big machine allegation. I've explained it this way, that we've explained it and shown probable cause. And I made the analogy of, there's a car in the parking lot, and there's an god-awful smell coming out of the car. There's a bloody handprint, but there's no one willing to open the trunk to look to see if there's a dead body in the trunk. And that's what the legislatures that's where they seem to be. They don't seem to realize that they have the power to say, okay, the legislatures have the authority here to look at this, at the elections. Whether it's a forensic audit, whether it's a ballot audit, whatever that they deem proper, no one seems to be willing to take the political risk to make sure that their voters, their citizens of their state, haven't had their civil rights denied. Yeah, so the objections that we've gotten from several state legislatures is that, well, these spike anomalies, they don't really indicate anything, and we didn't tell them that they were fraudulent. We just said they were indicators of fraudulent activity because they were uploaded faster than the machines could process that number of ballots. And they said, well, those ballots could have been held in a queue and just uploaded all at once. And that is a process, a function that's present in ES&S and Dominion. It's called batch processing. The administrator can load lots and lots, hundreds or thousands of ballots in a batch file, and according to the manual, they can vote those ballots however they see fit. If they think they're 80% for one candidate and 20% for one candidate, they can set that determinant and push the button, and those ballots are all adjudicated at that rate, or whatever rate that they determine. So we've only indicated that this is a spike. This is outside of the rest of the normal curve, and this is a good place to start looking if you want to get a true understanding of what happened in your election. So far, the legislatures don't seem to want to assert their constitutional authority in managing and seating the electorates as their constituents have voted.
Thank you, Colonel. We greatly appreciate your service. There's no doubt that there are issues with how the votes have been counted. A lot of that has to do with our second area of concern, the voting machines themselves, like Dominion. To address that issue, we have two experts, the first being Rod Martin, a technologist who worked with Peter Thiel and the PayPal startup team. Welcome, Rod. You've been briefed on how these systems like Dominion count the votes. Can you explain it?
Well, to put it the most simply for your audience, you aren't counting. When you're fractionalizing or tabulating, as the terminology goes, you aren't just counting the votes. The average person, I think, rightly, morally believes that when we have an election, we actually have humans who sit there and look at each vote and mark down, okay, that's one vote for Joe Biden, that's one vote for Donald Trump, that's one vote for the Libertarian. And if you have a machine do it, the machine is just replicating what a human would be doing. Not these machines. These machines put all of these votes in a bucket. They, as you said, fractionalize them, so you end up with these thousandths of a vote, and it is only thousandths of a vote. The tabulation does not go out to further decimal places. So in rounding errors alone, we've seen cases where the rounding errors were as much as 6,000 votes. You do that across an entire national election, and you can hide literally millions of votes if you wish to. And my contention would be that's really the only reason you would program a system like this. There's no reason for it not to be just a fancy adding machine, a Scantron from school. That's not what they're doing. And the obvious question that must be addressed and clearly is in front of us because it has been abused is, why on earth would you set up a system that is flawlessly designed to cheat if you weren't intending to cheat? And indeed, that's exactly what I believe we have found them doing.
Thank you, Rod. You're a great friend and a true patriot. Now, to continue this discussion, we're going to turn to another friend of the economic war room, a former candidate for Congress and a self-taught expert on election systems, Russ Ramsland. It's important to note that Russ warned well in advance of the election that these voting machines are vulnerable. He wasn't alone, as every expert agreed, but he stood up when others won't tell you the truth. Welcome, Russ. Would you tell us why the machines are vulnerable and what that means?
Well, as a result of 2018, when we saw the Dallas County election logs and our cyber guys were just horrified by what they saw, we jumped in here and we started mapping the whole voter system from end to end. And what we saw was amazing, because we just found this whole thing from start to finish is one long set of vulnerabilities of all kinds. And then we started researching the history and whatever everyone else had done on it. And we found out we're not the only guys that have found this. There are actually lots of cyber people out there who've reported on all this stuff. Just nobody is paying any attention. So in this election, what's interesting is we sort of see 2016 and 2018 as practicing various approaches. And in 2020 now, we see them all coming together. And we sort of see three different levels of actors. We see zealots, and zealots are local people who are, trying to help put in fake voters and fake voter rolls and all that kind of stuff, purge good votes, et cetera, et cetera. It's the kind of thing we saw in Georgia in that videotape in Fulton County where we saw them pull all the boxes out and start feeding all the ballots in. Those are zealots. Then we also see inside actors, and those may be the people in Dominion itself. It's hard to say. Somebody has set the algorithms up, what's called ranked choice voting inside these machines. And we now have absolute proof of it. You've seen it in Wade County recently. You've also seen it in Antrim County, we believe. And then we see what we call external actors. And these are the guys that are really scary, because that would be like Iran or China or one of these others. Serbia, for instance. Dominion has a backdoor directly into Serbia. And we can trace all these IP addresses, et cetera, so we can see these people actually have real-time access into the United States voting system. This is nuts. And they can download whole new databases of votes and just wholesale change them. So it's just a little out of control. And it's important, though, to understand that all three of these guys are all playing. It's not coordinated. This is not some grand conspiracy master plan necessarily. The zealots are the zealots, the inside actors, and the external actors are out there on their own. And that's really what kind of makes this hard, is that there's not just one single fraud that you come and find and then can say, oh, well, that's it. Now let's go find it everywhere else. No, that's not what happens. Now, the good news is that also ups the chances of starting to catch all this stuff, which we are. As I said, Wade County, Antrim, This school bus out in Arizona, they just found that was absolutely stuffed full of balloting machines. It had broken down. The video inside the Atlanta, you're just finding this stuff more and more. And that really gets me to the last point, which is the problem isn't a lack of hard evidence. There's tons of hard evidence. The problem is finding judges with the courage to step up to this, because this is the hottest potato they may ever be handed in their entire career. And unless they're really focused on their kids or their grandkids, they're going to want to walk away from this. They're going to just want to dismiss the suits. They're just going to want to bury it. But the hard evidence is there. I mean, we see these vote loads in numbers that are absolutely impossible. It's like you and I, Kevin, we're driving down in my Volkswagen Jetta, and we get a speeding ticket for 540 miles an hour. We say, well, Your Honor, there's no way I could be doing 540 miles an hour. The capacity of the car won't do that. Well, it's the same with these voting machines. These voting machines won't upload that many votes in that period of time. So we know that the votes got loaded some other way. There's hard proof as far as the turnout numbers. The turnout numbers in places are absolutely insane. And in some of these turnout, we're talking 90, 100, 110% of the registered voters. So that's ridiculous. And then, of course, Antrim and Wade County have demonstrated exactly what we've been saying, which is vote flipping. The last point I'd make is, see in a lot of these things that there's this little notice, this has been debunked. That's an artificial intelligence generated message by a supposed group of fact checkers. But the reality is those guys are funded by Facebook. It's a Facebook operation, and it's an automatic operation. And if you do like I do, people say, oh, well, that's debunked. I say, great. Let me see the evidence of the debunk. And do you know that not one single time can they offer any evidence that it's actually been looked at or debunked? All they can do is parrot what they saw on a screen that was produced artificially by Facebook.
Thank you, Russ. The fact that you warned us in advance is proof of your credibility. Now, some say that there's no proof that machines can flip votes. But there is an example in Georgia where the hand recount showed a significant difference from what the machine said. There's even an affidavit to that effect. So we brought in the man who made the affidavit to hear his story. The debunkers want to misconstrue what he said, but the facts speak for themselves. Welcome, Garland, and please tell us your story.
So what the facts are is that the hand count audit revealed 37 more votes for Donald Trump and 37 less for Joe Biden than what the machines actually counted on election day. So in other words, those machines flipped 37 votes from President Trump to former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, we don't know why they flipped the votes. We don't know if it was a software error, if it was a configuration setting, or a ballot definition mismatch of some kind. But I go through all those possible scenarios in my affidavit, and the most likely one, I believe, would be malware, although it's not proved conclusively until we have a forensic investigation of the server. And that's simply what we're asking for. Let's investigate the server, do a forensic investigation, and find out exactly what happened. The elections director already confirmed to us that the hand count audit revealed the 37 extra votes for Donald Trump and 37 less for Joe Biden. So whenever you do an audit of the electronic vote, which is completely unverifiable to begin with, the normal procedure is that you accept the count of the hand count of the audit as being the correct results. And that was exactly what the elections director did. He did everything correctly, as near as I can tell. And we've gotten his confirmation in writing. i.e. confirmed it to me verbally, and he confirmed it to Dr. Earl Martin verbally, who was a former Waycross City Commission candidate. So we have those three corroborating pieces of evidence, plus the actual, in my affidavit, I include the audit results from the Secretary of State's office and the certified election results from the Secretary of State's office. So we have 5 corroborating pieces of evidence that prove the debunkers have been debunked.
Thank you, Garland. I agree that a switch like you saw demonstrates the machines are not perfect. In fact, we know that they're vulnerable to foreign interference. But that risk is not confined to the machines. The past 4 years, we've been told how Russia colluded to put Donald Trump in the White House, even though there was zero evidence uncovered to that effect. But did you see the media debunking that? Of course not. Have you heard anything about foreign interference in this election? Of course not. But that doesn't mean that it isn't there. To learn more about foreign interference, let's turn to Col John Mills, another retired Army intelligence officer who served as the Director of Cybersecurity Policy Strategy and Affairs in the Office of Secretary of Defense. Welcome, Colonel Mills. Walk us through the foreign interference.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I don't even know where to begin with this question. There are so many warning signs about this election. The American public assumes that our elections are secure. They're being done by citizens that care about the process, that are acting as sworn election officials and upholding their duty and their oath of office. There's this assumption that things are being taken care of. Unfortunately, very few Americans get involved, and yes, somebody is taking care of the election process. With China and their plan for the world, and they do have a plan to be be the hegemonic power, their intent is to replace us and retire us. The elections are nothing but a big juicy target. There are so many opportunities for them. This is influence operations. These are influence operations on steroids. These are influence operations that we, in many ways, pioneered back in I would say in the 1950s with the Dulles brothers, but in many ways walked away from. They read our history. They read everything about us. And they understand influence operations on a massive scale. So for years, they have been essentially working what we would call preparation of the battle space. And a lot of that is influence operations. A lot of that is essentially payments to key individuals to acquire essentially willing enablers inside our own country. The Chinese have always been, their reputation is being noisier, less careful. They're not as concerned about being found out. And that professor last night from the clip on Tucker was very emblematic of their behavior. The Russians are known for being far more careful, far more silent, far more precise. And again, in these influence operations, I just have to be totally clear because I've actually run the numbers on this, available capital for influence operations. And the simple model is, yes, Russia interferes in our elections, and I believe they did, and they have for years. But for every dollar they spend, Soros spends 3, the Chinese spend 10. So I would, from our side, we always have to apply limited offensive and defensive resources. The threat is China. Now, in this election specifically, it is just they were all over the place. This was a massive blitz to essentially topple our election institution. And I wish. AG Barr said the other night, some comments the other day, I think they were probably inappropriate. The reality is our intelligence and law enforcement resources have effectively done very little, if anything, on Chinese influence operations. Why? Because being a former intelligence officer, being a former colonel and senior official in the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, how can you even run an intelligence operation or law enforcement operation when you don't even understand the election process? Our own people do not understand our processes. Therefore, how could you even set up an operation to secure our election operations when we don't even know how our own elections operate? Chris Krebs said very inappropriate things. The more honest and truthful answer was, I don't have the resources, the staffing, the technical expertise to even say yay or nay on Chinese interference. Same with AG Barr. I think it was inappropriate. I think that was his own staff that, frankly, gives a rote response of what is the accepted truth without any modicum of actual investigation. But the Chinese here, we have the 400 million through USB securities in Switzerland to Dominion, and the mysterious nature of the 8 registered companies under the Election Assistance Commission. Nobody understands what's going on. There's 8 registered companies, but when you do the business forensics, it's more like 3 and maybe even 1, and they're privately held with very little responsibility or requirement to be transparent. We have 400 million. That's on top of a payment, I believe it was in 2014, which is awfully mysterious because it was really 2015 when China rushed Office of Personnel Management and ripped off our huge list of everybody who had ever been associated with the United States government. From that, they gleaned an incredible mass of information here. But again, back to Dominion, I'm sorry, we don't understand these companies. They're privately held. 400 million before the election. We have this open talk of buying off officials. Professor Dong Sheng last night. The ballots we have on social media open, and we've confirmed them with native Mandarin speakers talking about shipping ballots to Florida, North Carolina. There's no control measures on these mail-in ballots. There's no essentially corroboration of paper weave, paper weight. There are multiple paper types of ink types. Are they copies? Have they been folded? This is a Disneyland for China, who is looking to massively rush and overwhelm our election integrity. And they did that. I've done some of the matching in some of the financial analysis in Virginia. The number of personnel staffing, and I'm just being apolitical on this, but comparing the Republican Party and the Democrat Party in Virginia, the staffing is outrageously different. The proceeds, I would suggest, do not cover the amount of personnel they have working for the Democrat Party in Virginia, for example. Where does that extra money come from? It is very curious. So from an influence operation perspective, matched with Chinese strategy, this is just an incredible opportunity and gives them an incredible return on investment. The American election system, between the mysterious election machine companies, the operation of those election machines makes absolutely no sense. Bringing all the votes together by all candidates and then using math to spin the numbers back out and apportion them, it makes absolutely no sense. So between the mysterious companies, the mysterious way the machines operate, between well-known active influence operations of the Chinese, our election system, we have assumed it was secure. We were concerned well in advance of this election. All the evidence points to this was and is a massive Chinese influence operation. And there's very little, what I have found is very, very few, and those are personnel who are supposed to understand our election system. Very few understand how our elections operate. And we just assume somebody is taking care of it. And that's right, somebody is taking care of it.
Thank you, Colonel, for both briefing us, but also for your distinguished service. There's no doubt that China desired to defeat President Trump and replace him with Vice President Biden. That was the conclusion of our nation's intelligence service before the election. And guess what? China was interfering. And we have the proof. We brought in Dr. Sean Lin, Executive Director of Truth Warriors Alliance. Dr. Lin, welcome to the Economic War Room. Tell us what you found with the Chinese counterfeit ballots.
Kevin, thank you very much for inviting me to your press conference. So regarding about the counterfeit ballots being produced inside the communist China, we did had an interview with Attorney Sidney Powell recently, and she pointed out that counterfeit ballots are still being shipped into the United States, crossing Mexican-U.S. borders. Let me roll a very short clip for you.
Ballots.
We do. We've heard a video of somebody ordering ballots from China. We have evidence of a significant plane load of ballots coming in, and we have a witness that has said they continue to come in because they intend to run counterfeit ballots in any runoffs or if they need them in recounts too. So it hasn't stopped.
So echoing Sidney Powell's allegation on these counterfeit ballots, one young Chinese immigrant actually stepped forward to testify on this aspect. And his name is E.D. Wei. English name is Vinicius Olivacetti. So he actually was a princeling from the Chinese Communist Party because his grandfather was a very senior Communist Party member and was able to attend the formal ceremony when Chairman Mao announced the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. And he immigrated to the United States and now resides in California. So recently he used his connections inside China and managed to establish a contact with the owner in the underground print shop. And he found out they were able to produce counterfeit ballots for customers from the United States. And let's also roll the tape.
This conversation between this is the person in China. It's on his table. It's at the U.S. election ballot.
对啊，因为你仔细看一下，它那个选票的那个印刷是不一样的。
Yeah, on the right, to the right, you see the translation of their conversation.
然后到时候你们这边发物流的话怎么发？因为我这边订的话就是大量的订这样子。
大量订，那个发物流的话，一般好像也要好几天哦，物流比较慢。
发国际可以吗？
我看一下，发国际好像也是走物流啊。
可以走是吧？我这边你这边费用的话多少钱打印一张？我这边现在叫人给你转。
那个跟上次一样啊。
OK， 好，我知道了，你再把二维码发我一遍，谢谢。
然后那个还欠一点那个。
知道。OK， 好。
So from Mr. Yi's testimony, we can see hundreds of thousands, even more than a million counterfeit ballots have been shipped into the United States. And I definitely think these allegations warrants more investigation and probably from the federal agencies. And the federal agents need to immediately stop the continuing influx of counterfeit ballots into the United States.
Thank you for that explanation. Now will you tell us about the Chinese video that proves they wanted to promote Joe Biden?
So, Kevin, regarding about Joe Biden's family's connection with the Chinese communist regime, and recently one video actually shocked the whole netizens inside China. And this video is about a scholar from Renmin University. His name is Di Dongshen, and he's the vice dean of the School of International Relations in the Renmin University in Beijing. So Mr. Di is no ordinary scholar. In 2015, he actually accompanied Mr. Guo Weiming, the Deputy Director of the Information Office of State Councils in China, to visit Washington, D.C., and then hosted a seminar to promote Xi Jinping's new book regarding the governance of China. So recently, he made a very important speech on November 28 in Shanghai, and the event was actually discussing about the opening of China's financial market to the world. So in this event, his speech addressed the connection between the deep state of the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and he actually implied that Hunter Biden's global fund was established under the help of the Chinese Communist regime. So let's roll the tape.
那么我们为什么搞不定特朗普政府？啊，为什么以前1992年到2016年之间，中美之间各种问题都能搞得定？就是因为咱们上边有人，啊，就是我们在美国的权势核心圈啊，我们有我们的老朋友。过去这个30年啊，过去40年，我们在美国的他的这个利用他权势核心圈，是不是？但问题是，08年之后，华尔街的地位下降了。更重要的是，16年之后，华尔街搞不定特朗普。现在呢？现在我们看到拜登上台了。传统的精英、政治精英啊，这个建制派，他们跟华尔街的关系是非常密切的。所以大家看到吧，拜登的儿子被特朗普说你在全球有什么基金公司，发现没有？谁帮他建的基金公司啊？明白吗？这里边都有买卖啊。那么
Well, I will encourage everyone to watch the full episode of Mr. Deason's speech. I think this is a very strong indirect evidence after Hunter Biden's laptop and also Mr. Bobulinski's testimony. This is a very important evidence, indirect evidence, to show the connection between Biden's family and the Chinese Communist regime. So this is actually suggesting that Biden's family pose a great threat to the national security of the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. That is unbelievable. And speaking of unbelievable, there's this whole issue of impossible votes. You may have heard stories of 130,000 votes in a row for Joe Biden. One expert told us that the voting patterns were so impossible it would be like winning the Powerball lottery 4 times in a row. But the courts haven't been willing to look at the statistical evidence, and the media says, where's the proof? The statistics are the proof. In fact, that's how you find fraud. You start with anomalies. We showed you how the National Academy of Sciences wrote a whole paper on this back in 2012. To drill down on the statistical evidence, we've invited in one of the world's top experts on fraud identification. He and his team are so good that eBay asked them to build their fraud detection system. So we welcome Jay Valentine. Jay, tell us why statistics matter in identifying fraud.
Sure, Kevin. I led the team that built the fraud detection engine for eBay. So we have a long history in cyber criminal activity and how to find it when people are doing everything they can to use computers to hide in the data. We broke some of the largest fraud rings in Medicare and Medicaid and property casualty insurance. When you're looking at what's called industrial level fraud where you are dealing with large data sets, not somebody just changing a few invoices, but big data fraud. The way that you find the fraud is you look for a starting point. And a starting point is found with statistical pattern analysis. Now, what that means is that every data set, it could be a data set of Girl Scout cookies and how they're sold. It could be the most innocent data set in the world. All data sets have patterns in them of how the data looks and operates. Fraud is no different. What statistical pattern analysis does is it looks for the patterns in the data and it finds outliers, it finds anomalies in the data. And what is happening in this election, and it's very well shown on your site, EveryLegalVote.com. You have a very excellent presentation there of what statistical fraud looks like. So what happens is with statistical fraud, you actually can look at these large data sets. You can see these very strange anomalies, and from the anomalies, you dig in, and that's where you find the real fraud.
That's fascinating, Jay. Tell me more.
I looked at a bunch of the analyses out there by people like Dr. Shiva and 3 or 4 other very good statisticians. I mean, these people are state of the art. Their mathematics is outstanding. And I reviewed that. I reviewed that material very, very carefully. And what I was able to see, and I was able to see it again and again, is that the fraud that occurred was industrial level. It was the type of fraud that could only be done with computers creating algorithms. And you can see it because across different data sets, a precinct, for instance, might be a data set. Every precinct had exactly the same algorithm moving votes from candidate A to candidate B. That can only be done with computer algorithms. And what the conclusion is very clear. If you take a look and you can get hold of those voting machines, and you can look at the source code and you can look at the log files, you're going to find how that fraud actually occurred.
Thank you, Jay. That's fascinating. And we agree there was industrial grade fraud happening. And we agree with the 75% of Americans who believe, in fact, that there was serious fraud. But will anyone do anything about it? So far, the courts have punted. But there may be an unstoppable strategy, a way to get the court interested, and not just any court. To learn more, let's welcome one of my favorite attorneys, the former Inspector General of the Department of Defense, the Honorable Joseph Schmitz. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Kevin. It's great to be on.
Hey, Joe, we just saw a case filed by Texas suing other states under some concept known as original jurisdiction. Can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah, sure. Under the Constitution, Article 3, the Supreme Court has what is called original jurisdiction over a number of types of lawsuits, including states versus states. So in the case that was filed last night by Texas against Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and Arizona, the Attorney General of Texas invoked this constitutional provision providing the U.S. Supreme Court with the original jurisdiction to hear these cases.
You know, you're the guy who taught me about original jurisdiction years ago. We were talking about how to deal with immigration and other issues, and you've been writing about this in your column at Newsmax. I mean, this is a powerful thing. I understand that you've got another perspective that maybe Texas ought to take into account. Tell us about the 1871 law and why that might apply.
Okay, so the 14th Amendment was enacted in 1868. And it triggered a flurry of implementing statutes out of Congress, including the Civil Rights Act of 1871, which prohibits conspiracies to deprive American citizens of basic civil rights. And it focused on the voting rights of freed slaves. And this law in the vernacular is sometimes referred to as the Ku Klux Klan Act, because there was a very serious problem after the 14th Amendment was passed. There were literally violent conspiracies going on, mostly in the southern states, to prevent the freed slaves from having that fundamental right to vote.
Wow, well, you know, I'm getting to feel a little like that there's a conspiracy to defraud the deplorables, those that support President Trump, from their right to vote. And we've seen it in these states. But how delicious would that be to have southern state Texas suing northern states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin under the KKK Act? That's incredible.
Yeah, even more delicious would be if West Virginia were to join Texas, considering the KKK's history and Senator Byrd and all that. Wouldn't that be an irony?
That would be terrific. Well, I hope to see that your great legal mind is applied in this. You know, I'm going to mention this to our Attorney General here in Texas and suggest it everywhere I can, because, Joe, I can't imagine a better opportunity to stand up for the civil rights of Americans. I mean, what you just framed was that this is truly a civil rights issue. It's not just somebody conducting voter fraud in one state or another. What they do in Pennsylvania or Georgia or Michigan, what they're doing there actually really is denying civil rights, isn't it?
No, and it's not just civil rights generically. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1964 has referred to the right to vote as the right upon which every other right is based. Without the right to vote, and the Supreme Court implicitly was saying in free and fair elections, without that right, all of our other civil rights are for naught. They all go to the wayside. So this is really, really an important civil right, and it's a fundamental right. It's like the prime right, the prime civil right, and ironically, or not ironically, is the Civil Rights Act of 1871 was focused on voting rights. And that's why Congress passed this statute, which forbids anybody from conspiring to deprive American citizens of the right to vote in free and fair elections.
Well, I'm not an attorney, and I'm certainly not a judge, but when I look at the videos, like our friend Jacki showed a video, there were 2 or more persons, and when I read that 1871 Act, it literally says if 2 or more persons conspire. That's what it sure appears like to me what happened.
Well, that's right, and the fact that Texas sued 4 states for essentially doing the same thing, it wasn't coincidental. People had to be conspiring for these 4 states to be doing the same thing. And as Texas points out in the complaint it filed last night, it was a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. And that's exactly what the Civil Rights Act of 1871 focuses on.
And what in that complaint did you find the most credible? I mean, because there's issues of mail-in ballots and all that. What did you find the most compelling from your perspective?
Well, the most compelling thing I found is the way that the Texas Attorney General actually framed the issue and cited statistical analysis that shows that it was like I don't know, 1 in a bazillion chance of all 4 of these states, considering where the actual ballot projections were on the morning of the 4th of November, it's like 1 in a bazillion chance that all 4 of those states would have flipped to Joe Biden.
You know, and the statistical analysis has long been considered in election analysis. It's something the State Department talks about. It's in the Carter Center and others. And there was even a National Academy of Sciences report in 2012 that said that is the best way to find fraud. And our last guest that we had, Jay Valentine, who was the built the eBay fraud detection engine, does fraud work for Medicare and everything else. He says it all starts with statistical analysis, and he basically said there was industrial grade fraud. So do you think that given all of those truths, and by the way, denying fraud is denying science. Don't be a science denier. But do you think that we have a chance? Do you think the court's going to hear the case, number one? I'll ask that, and then I'll come back and ask, what do you think they'll do with it?
Yes. First, let me go back to what you said about fraud, because I heard last week Mark Levin had this brilliant analysis of what's going on in Pennsylvania. And, you know, people talk about, well, there's no evidence of systemic fraud. Look, I wrote the Inspector General manual, which basically the subtitle, which is Fraud, Waste, Abuse, and Other Constitutional Enemies, Foreign and Domestic. So Mark points out the same point that I point out in my handbook, is there's criminal fraud, there's civil fraud, and what's happening is the people are raising sort of a straw man of criminal fraud as if that's the only way fraud can manifest itself. Look, I wrote an article last week in Newsmax. You know, the elephant in the living room is this is a deliberate effect. I mean, a deliberate conspiracy over, and Mark Levin puts this out. Since October of 2019, there has been a deliberate effort to corrupt the election process, and this was long before COVID, by the way, to corrupt the election process in Pennsylvania by pushing for this massive mail-in ballots. And the bipartisan commission that was set up after Bush versus Gore to see what went wrong said that the mail-in votes are the most ripe area for fraud. And they weren't talking about criminal fraud and mens rea and that type of fraud. I mean, look, this is just common sense. Well, you just look and see what's happened over the last 18 months. There is a deliberate conspiracy to corrupt the election process in the battlefield states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada.
No, I think you're totally right. Do you think the court's going to hear the case? And if they do, they're going to hear it. And if they do hear it, do they have remedies that might change the outcome of the election?
Yes. And, you know, the remedies is sort of the difficult, that's the sticky issue. What I have suggested in my articles and my writings is that the U.S. Supreme Court direct the states to disregard all the mail-in ballots and to send a very clear message that mail-in ballots are essentially an invitation to steal elections. And that terminology isn't my original one. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, described all this shenanigans that have been deliberately put into play to defeat Donald Trump this time as an invitation to steal. That's exactly what it is. And the Supreme Court should call that out and basically should direct the states to stop inviting people to steal elections. It's just fundamentally wrong.
Well, Joe, you're fantastic. You're a true American patriot. Thank you for your service, your wisdom, and understanding of this legal approach. We can only hope that the Supreme Court will pause and look into all the obvious fraud and do the right thing. So thank you for joining us in the Economic War Room. We're going to follow up with you and see if this idea takes root, and we'll keep our viewers apprised. So thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's an honor to be on your show.
So let's recap what we've covered so far. We introduced you to EveryLegalVote.com as an important educational resource. Second, we debunked the debunkers, and we answered the objections that people are raising. Third, we looked at some of the most compelling evidence that serious fraud did take place. And fourth, we shared a legal strategy that could rock Washington and the whole nation. The Supreme Court might not have a choice. They may have to take this case, and at least 5 justices will look honestly and deeply into the fraud. Now comes the important part. This is where you and I take responsibility. There are 2 things that we need to do. Number 1, we first need to pray. The stakes are high. We're caught between the Egyptian army on one side and the Red Sea on the other. So let's take time, get on our knees, and ask God to expose the fraud, bring out the truth, and make things right. But that's not all. Second, we have another action step we have to take. In fact, go to EveryLegalVote.com, and there's a button that says Take Action. Go to there, click it. What you'll be doing is you'll be telling our leaders to do their job. So go to EveryLegalVote.com, find the Take Action button, click it, and join millions of Americans in telling our leaders to do their job. Join this case. Help solve this problem. We've had more than 3 million people combined come to our website and take action so far, but this is the biggest campaign we're doing. Tell them to do their job. And it's worked. In our past campaigns, we did force legislative hearings in 4 states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia. But Take Action now is to urge them to do their job. We'll produce an economic battle plan that sums up what we've talked about here, and you can get a free copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. And there's no bigger battle space right now than the 2020 election. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.